Uh, Rich, how about your initial responses to the EPA's new rule?
Well, let's hope whatever media or treatment process that you select provides you years of non-detection, whether it's at 20 parts per trillion or at 4 parts per trillion, because all of us are spending huge dollars in our communities, water systems, and it's now going to be perpetual to replace the media in there. So if you choose the right product, you hopefully you get longevity out of that material. But that's another $1 million question: is how long a life will you have, whether it's GAC or ion exchange?
Thank you, Rich.
Yeah.
Fran, you're the most recently developing pilot testing for PFAS treatment in your community. What were your initial reactions to the EPA's new standards?
Well, it's tough to take. I mean, we're a small little water system. We found that all of our sources have elevated PFAS. Some are high, some are just over the limits. But with the health concerns, I'm pretty much in favor of, if we have the ability to treat them, I want to treat them. So in our pilot testing, we're also, it wasn't specific to PFAS. We have other issues going on with the water quality, like iron and manganese. But the pilot testing also testing that for prior to the PFAS treatment. So it adds an additional expense, but I mean that was always needed in the past anyway. So it's a good thing for that. But as Rich mentioned, it's thinking of the ongoing cost is pretty concerning.
Thanks, Fran. You also have stated some challenges. Can you what specific challenges do you have or foresee in implementing your plan to treat PFAS?
Well, most of it's tied to the money. We went through a master plan to come up with the best long-term financial planning for the operation of the PFAS treatment. So we do a combination of plants, but the financing is the most difficult part. We need to borrow a large $32.2 million. It's up for next week's vote to see if because we're on the IUP for SRF funding. So hopefully that'll pass. If it doesn't pass, then who knows what the future is going to bring for ability for funding, SRF funding, because with the large amount of communities going after this, how much is actually going to be there. So I'm kind of concerned that if this gets passed by, then will we have the future opportunity to have access to it.
Thank you. Vin, can you walk us through the process that your water supply system is undertaking to develop your plans for PFAS management?
Sure can. So I started here at Sudbury Water District back in 2017, right next to just outside of Sudbury is a Stowe Firefighting Academy. So I had an inkling that there may be an issue with PFAS when I came here. And I remember finding out when I came on board that we had actually participated in UCMR 3 testing, and levels at that time were non-detectable, which is a good thing. But as anybody knows, the technology is far much more advanced place than it was back then. So anyways, it was shortly after I came on board the Firefighting Academy. DP conducted a major investigation, or not an investigation over there, but they were looking to find out what's going on with PFAS, and there's a reservoir across the street from there, and found out there was all kinds of PFAS that was related to the firefighting foam that they use for training. And so we were contacted at the Water District along with the Board of Health, and it was shortly thereafter that we tested all of our sources. We tested PFAS at all of our sources. We've got a total of 9 wells. They were not, the numbers weren't high, as anybody recalls. There was no standard back then. But we were right around 10 to 15 parts per trillion at all of the sources. So it was at that time, and it was already talked to from, through DEP, sources that we had from DEP, that the state was working to promulgate a regulation on at least 6 compounds back then. So we wanted to be proactive with it. So we hired a consultant. We did a kind of a study. It was called an emerging contaminant response plan. We looked at all of our sources. We analyzed the water and kind of came up with a plan and what it would cost for us. So after that, we appropriated money and we applied for funding, and started the process of educating the public with this whole thing. So, and we also applied for SRF back then as well. And so appropriated money for the engineering design, submitted the application for SRF, and then also at that time, we were looking at other sources of funding. So this was right around the time COVID was happening. So there was opera funding available, which is another unique story because, as anybody knows, water districts weren't eligible for any of the opera funding. We actually had the town of Sudbury got like a $5.6 million appropriation to the state for the American Rescue Plan funding, and we didn't get any of it. But what we did do, I lobbied the legislature, local legislatures, and so we were able to get $150,000 grant from the state opera fund grant toward these type of projects, which, as anybody knows, is a drop in the bucket, but it helped toward the engineering cost. The other thing we applied for a state grant through DEP. We were fortunate to receive $111,000 and some change for that. So, you know, that combined with an appropriation we were able to hit the ground running for design. And then throughout the design process, that's when we submitted the application for the SRF funding. For the first project, we were pre-approved on the Clean Water Trust list for close to $4 million, which is a small number, but that was about what the estimates were to do the project. And then so throughout that process too, in order to secure funding, and like any type of funding, whether it be through the SRF or if you're going to go to bond for any type of project, you need to have a vote from the body, whether it be the town at the annual town meeting, or in my case, it would be the annual district meeting. So at our annual district meeting, we put together an article to request authorization for the borrowing of those funds through the SRF program. Once we secured that, we put the project out to bid, awarded the project, and we're actually doing testing today on the project for the first project. So that's a process that I've gone through. So hopefully everybody kind of get it. So I know it's long-winded with that. My apologies for that too.
No, that's quite all right. Thank you, Vin.
Okay.
Rich, are there any differences in the approach or the challenges faced by different water systems, water supply systems in addressing PFAS contamination?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Paul. So the challenges we encountered, because we were out in front of many other public water suppliers, and there was a lack of shared experience with carbon or granular activated carbon. And carbon isn't 100%. And so my point to sharing with all public water suppliers is when you conduct your column pilot testing, make sure you include metals and IOCs, and choose a laboratory that reports and data belongs to you. So you control that data so that you can make the analysis of whether or not that material is going to be right for the community and your consumers, because that was something that was missed by our consultants. So certainly something that I would like to share with other public water suppliers.
Thank you, Rich.
Yep.
Fran, I know that I've heard that you're dealing with your residents in a community that can be very vocal. How are you engaging with your community and your stakeholders in the development and implementation of your plan?
We're trying every way we can. Well, of course, with the help of Nicole. I mean, we have a lot of Facebook website. We've had several presentations with the engineering firm, presenting the whole master plan, how this is going to work, and the financial costs. So we're trying to put it out there, and it's tough because all we hear is, we don't really hear from the people who support our side. We usually hear of the ones that are fighting against it. So we're not sure really where we stand in this. But we're trying. We're doing everything we can to get it out there. I'm not sure what else we could do.
Thank you, Fran. Vin, same question for you, dealing with the public and public outreach and getting the word out about PFAS and your plans to mitigate those that contamination.
So what I've done, like I said earlier, we've been communicating frequently with the Board of Health. I've got a good relationship with the town manager here in Sudbury, as well as some of the select board here in Sudbury. They actually have a liaison to the water district, and so we chat. And I've kept them all up to speed with what's going on here at the water district. We also have good information on our website. But the thing is, with the website, you should always update it. And so
Yeah.
That's my advice to anybody. Don't let it get stale, because then people are not going to pay attention to it. And the other thing is that I've done right here in town, I'll tell you, just recently, I participated in an event that was held by the League of Women Voters. They asked me to come and see if I could participate in a panel similar to this and talk about PFAS in Sudbury. And so anytime I have an opportunity, anytime that I, or even the Board of Water Commissioners here, we've got an opportunity to talk about it. We get out there, we're trying to stay in front of it. So that's the thing. I just participated in an event just a couple of weeks ago. There was the Earth Day event here in Sudbury, and somebody from the town wanted to know if I had any interest in being able to put on a presentation for that. And I jumped all over it, because anytime you can get out there, it's only going to help us when we're looking for funding. And that's the thing. You want to keep people educated and let them know what we're doing here and why we're doing it. And ultimately, we work really for them, but we also have to comply with both state and federal regulatory requirements. And so we got to let everybody know that too. So not everybody realizes that. So that's that.
So
Thanks,
Paul,
Scott.
we have a question from the audience. Daryl Beardsley, and I apologize if I'm killing your name, asked if there's any system using PFAS removal technology other than the granular activated carbon.
Yes, I think Rich might be able to answer that question. Rich?
Yes, so we're using ion exchange resin after the granular activated carbon wasn't accepted. So that's what we have at 3 of our filter plants in Easton, and soon to be adding it to our green sand filtration plant as well.
Can I add a little bit to that too? So I just wanted to say, yeah, GAC, or granular activated carbon, is probably the most common. But I think it was Rich or maybe Fran, it talked about bench scale testing. That's really the most important thing. Knowing water quality, what are you dealing with? And then how will kind of determine on how you're going to treat for that. Having green cell filtration in place before the carbon is really a good thing. Same thing for the resin, because what will happen if you've got iron and manganese in your water, you don't have green cell filtration, what will happen was it'll bind or it'll blind the media, whether it be granular activated carbon or the resin compounds. So those are all factors too. But ultimately, working with a consultant, doing some bench scale testing is huge. There's another type of filtration system too, membrane filtration. That's usually used for like pinpoint filtration for like sinks and home domestic use and stuff like that. But there are also other technologies that are being tested I'm aware of. Ultimately, the EPA has a lot of that stuff available on their website. So my advice to anybody who they haven't done anything yet, again, educate yourself, look at the EPA website, see what Mass DEP has, and ultimately talk to your consultant, get educated. So
another point with the ion exchange is that you actually have a pre-filter called a bag filter. That essentially is just a sediment filter that captures whether it's iron or manganese. And so that becomes another, expenditure, because inside these vessels, you have like 8 compartments of filters in which, depending on how dirty it is, they're going to be needed to be replaced periodically.
We have another question from the audience. Dennis is asking, Rich, you started pre-COVID. How did supply chain shortages impact your schedule?
Great question. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a killer. We knew in advance that our vessels were gonna take 52 weeks to be manufactured and delivered on site. So we actually broke that out of our contract and did that as a separate contract with a vendor who supplied us the vessels and the media. But also, you know, there were lots of things that we anticipated that deliverable goods were going to be impacted. So we put provisions for temporary equipment in our contracts so that motor controls, VFDs, steel, all the construction goods that we felt were critical items, you know, we made sure that we hounded the general contractor and suppliers on the delivery dates of those items. But we also, you know, asked that they provide temporary equipment, especially on motor controls, major electrical switches, and VFDs, because those items and generators all take a tremendous amount of time, and they'll ruin your whole time schedule.
Sounds like you had a lot of contingencies built into your contracts. Ben, you had your hand up. Did you want to contribute to that as well? Because I know you guys started around that same time.
We sure did. And so I remember before we went out to bid on the project, we anticipated delays. So one of the things we did before we even bid it out, you know, because normally a project like this is about a year, but because of the delays, we didn't want to scare contractors away. So we extended that deadline out on completing the project. So we went from a year, and it was written in the invitation for bids too beforehand. I think we went out to like 16 months or something like that, or 18 months. And in order to get good bids, because ultimately, if you've got some tight specifications with a tight time frame, and especially with more and more of these projects being put out to bid, some contractors won't even bid on it, and ultimately you're not getting the best pricing out there. So bear that in mind as you're going forward too.
Right. So this is a question for me, not from anybody else.
Yeah.
But I know none of you have a crystal ball with the number of, you know, public water suppliers that in Massachusetts alone are going to have to comply with the EPA's new ruling. Can you foresee some challenges ahead for them as far as materials, contractors, things of that nature?
No question. Just because there are more communities that are going to be having to do these type of projects. And the other thing is the requirements for the SRF funding is Buy America. So that's going to drive the prices up because you've got less competition. I'm all for Buy America, but just know that you're going to be paying a premium because there's only, you know, there were a limited number of suppliers for some of the material that you're going to be buying, whether it be vessels or, you know, motor controllers and all the other associated equipment that are involved with these projects. These are all variables that are going to go in raising prices and pushing completion dates out. So just bear that in mind.
Yeah, so you guys are talking about all the concerns that I have. You know, what's the future going to bring? I mean, when it's time to build the treatment plant, am I going to be able to get a contract to do it in a, you know, a set time frame? You know, or are we even gonna get people to bid the project because they're already doing 10 other projects or something? So you know, a lot of this, the crystal ball would be great, you know. So this is difficult to look to the future, and when people ask questions, it's tough that you don't really know. You can't give a specific exact answer because there's too many unknowns out there.
Right.
So Fran, my advice to you is, you know, obviously your consultants, they're working with a whole bunch of other municipalities, water suppliers on similar type projects, and they know because they're in the bidding environment. Because that's one of the things that I approached our consultant on. What's a realistic expectation on being able to get this project done? And so you really want to lean on them heavily, you know, and get that information beforehand. So then when you're talking to the public, you know, it's based on real data or real information that you got from somebody else that's an expert in the industry.
We have two more questions from our audience. The first one's from Tom Trainer. Can you give us some idea of the yearly ongoing operation costs involved? I know that's been a concern too for some of the public meetings that I've attended.
Rich, you're the only one operating.
Well,
You guys-
there were multiple facets to that. So first is the outlay of designing, and then you get into construction costs. So those are the first couple of items, but never mind, during all of this, you're doing all the testing. So when we were first coming out of the gate, just the expense of the sampling, the price of doing the one individual test was almost $1,000. So we were also saddled with the public perception and dealing with violations being under Mass DEP. So I had additional expenditures for sending out quarterly violation notice of exceeding the 20 parts. We also partnered with Capital Strategic to help us with responding to the overwhelming number of calls and concerns, because I had a staff of one. So certainly you can't operate with just one person answering the phone when you're having that volume of calls. But we also had to provide alternative water. So we had to do a contract with a local vendor who we got to pilot a small vending machine outside our building that provide PFAS-free water while we built our 3 filter plants. So there were lots of costs that evolved during my first several years before we got our 3 filter plants online. So those are just additional costs that are on top of all of the construction costs. So I know I'm not directly answering, but anticipate if you're looking for a set dollar amount, you're probably talking about several $100,000 to your operational budget just those first few years. For us, we'll be continuing to continue to sample our system, but also sample the vessels that have the media inside it, because now we have to determine when we got a breakthrough and we got to replace that media. So it is now forever and perpetual.
Thanks, Rich. Vin, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I thought Rich was great. I just want to emphasize too, as far as the SRF loan, our bond, whatever you're going to use to finance a project like this, those are fixed costs going forward. But the biggest thing is the varying cost is the O&M cost. That stays forever, because the fixed costs will eventually, you pay off a loan and that's it, it's gone. But it's the O&M costs. It's the cost of replacing the media, or maybe you got to hire staff and the added electricity and all the other associated things that are with this. That's something that's going to be forever, that's associated with this type of with these type of projects. So bear that in mind. I think Rich was right on it. $100,000. I think if you've got a couple of treatment plants, it could be more than that. It really just depends on how much media you're going to have to replace and how frequently you need to replace it. But bear that in mind, that this is just not going to be a one time or a few year cost and that's it, it goes away. We're dealing with this forever going forward. So that was it.
We have another question from Dennis for everyone. We've had numerous private wells. How are you addressing private wells if they're above the MCL, meaning that they have private, wells separate from the public water supply and want to connect to your system? Are you planning for their ability to connect to your system for like expansion or anything like that?
Rand, do you have a quantity of private wells in your community?
Yes, so we supply like an area like 50% of the town, so there is quite a bit of private wells. That's kind of part of our long-term thinking is to, you know, have sources to meet the future demands. But yeah, I mean, we're a water district, so we have a bound set, but we could always expand those to whatever area is needed. And so we're not sure. And when people start doing their PFAS testing on their individual wells, then it's going to start getting decide, do we expand the water system? Do they put in their own treatment process? So that's just time to tell. But we kind of, in my opinion, I anticipate an expansion to cover certain areas if it's needed. We're fully prepared to do it.
Thank you, Fran. Nicole, any other questions right now?
Yep, we do. We have one for Rich or Ben. Do you have any idea about the cost and protocols of disposal of the media? That's from an anonymous attendee.
Okay, well, I know what the granular activity topic, because that's what we're doing with our 2 treatment plants. And so we haven't actually, like I said, we're gonna put our first plant online here in a couple of weeks. But the cost of disposal, not really clear on that yet. I don't have that. I didn't have the budget for that, so I don't have any clear numbers on that yet. But what I can tell you is municipality is able to regenerate that carbon. How many times you're able to regenerate it, I'm not clear on that, whether it be 2, 3 times. There's obviously a cost that's associated with having to regenerate it too. And that's going to be, that'll be similar to what you do on your drinking water chemical contracts. You'll contract with a vendor, somebody like Calgon or whoever you're getting the media from. It would be a bid item. You would write specifications up for that, and then go out to the bid accordingly. And then, you know, that's how I'm going to handle it. I'll get some projected costs for next year's budget, so I've got that in place. I just don't want to throw a number out there and be way off.
So what I can share is, I'm going to, our annual town meeting on May 20th. And, I have a 5-year plan of asking $6.8 million for ion exchange replacement. So, it's built in with that cost when we have breakthrough that the supplier will remove the spent material and replace it with new ion exchange. So that's usually whether you use a consulting engineer or you build that out yourself, it's usually the price tag that you're building in at today's cost that has the removal of the contaminated media and it's replaced with new material at the time. So there isn't an additional cost, but it's already built into that cost. So, you know, that will be something for the town of Easton, is to try to get a vendor with multiple years in a contract so that we lock in a price for a number of years at a time, rather than keep on doing this year after year. And you know the price is going to escalate. It's never going to go down. Even though I've heard people say, yeah, the more people get involved, the price will come down. I hope the product gets better so that we have a longer longevity of that product so that we don't have to replace it as often.
I got a question for Rich. Rich, are they able to regenerate the resin? Which I thought they could, but can you talk about that?
From what I've heard, Vincent, no, they do not regenerate.
Okay, so they just dispose of it and they bring you, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So we do have one more question from our audience. Daryl Beardsley is asking, are your municipalities concerned about the long-term liability associated with the disposal of the spent carbon resin membranes containing PFAS, given that PFAS destruction has not yet been perfected and is expensive, or we'll all just have to cross that bridge when we get to it?
Kind of answers his own question there.
Well, these chemical companies that are supplying the media are probably the ones that provided you the pollution in the first place. So they're the ones that are hauling it away and making significant dollars on these products here.
Yeah, it's a good point. The other thing I was going to say with that too is because we're outsourcing that, we've shifted liability away from the water provider to the land, the landfiller and everybody else that's involved with the, under the contract that we have with them for disposing the material. So to me, the liability is not with us anymore because we've, and they've got to, don't forget too, whomever you contract with, for providing you with replacement material and hauling off the spent material, is they've got to meet both state and federal standards for disposal. So, and that stuff's heavily regulated. Any of you out there that have AC pipe in the ground and know the process for disposing AC pipe, there's a lot of paperwork that's involved with that. Well, this is going to be very, very similar.
Right.
Very similar to
I'm
soils.
personally not afraid of liability.
Yeah, it's very similar to soils. I mean, we deal with soils. Disposal of soils are quite common with public works as well as the asbestos pipe. So those vendors have to follow the regulations, and they're very stringent.
Yeah.
No question. Yeah.
We have another question from the audience. Dennis would like to know, Fran, they're in a similar situation. They're at 80% design, and they have but they're a little different in that they have an interconnection with North Attleboro, so they do have some redundancy. We have limited capacity that's hindered economic growth. Is redundancy the only challenge you face, or is capacity also an issue?
Well, redundancy is one of the most focused things at this point, but the capacity also is a future. I mean, we're trying to project out 20, 30 years. And we do think capacity will come into play at some time in the future. Some of our sources are very limited on capacities. So redundancy isn't like I'm perfectly happy with it. I mean, I prefer something a little more with more capacity to handle our needs. We don't really have any interconnections. We have the ability to connect, but no like pump station. We're a higher pressure system, so we cannot just easily connect to a hydrant to hydrant kind of thing. It would be a little more difficult. We'd have to put a pump in there to pump it into Lunenburg, and so we have 2 towns we can actually do that too. So I don't consider that a redundancy thing. I think that's if something we were shutting down a section of town, we could probably come up with a plan to activate it. But with this whole PFAS thing coming on, if we treat one source and not others, then how is then the redundancy thing really comes into play? How are we going to survive with only one source providing the water? So I think down the road, both things will be a difficult thing to we're just trying to oversee all that to make sure it's not an issue down the road.
Yeah, it seems like that's a big challenge with a lot of suppliers right now, public water suppliers looking at their systems, whether they have enough redundancy in their system or capacity or a mixture of both. Rich or Vin, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I don't know if any of you that have participated in this coffee talk familiar with what the MWRA just did a couple of years. Actually, they kind of completed the last year, although there is still some talk going on. They did a Metro West expansion study for communities, including Sudbury, north of Framingham, all the way up to like Lowell. And what initiated was Concord, the town of Concord actually initiated it because of their cost, their projected cost for having to do treatment. A lot of it having to do with PFAS. And so they were looking to possibly connect on to the MWRA. But the thing is with Concord, they don't have direct access. They would have to go through another community. So they reached out to the MWRA and then got a bunch of other communities involved, including Sudbury. And we all participated in this Metro West expansion study just because of PFAS. But then we found out as they went on with this study, the projected cost for a water main aqueduct that's to provide water to about 12, 13 towns, whatever it was going to be about $1.2 billion. And then we're all going to have to maybe split the cost. So You know, it's like, whoa, talk about crazy amount of money. Yeah, you know, so that kind of scared everybody away. We're talk about redundancy here in Sudbury. One of the things that we're doing, we've already got a price proposal to conduct a study, because we don't have any interconnections either. We're going to do a study, a feasibility study on doing interconnections with the surrounding community, looking at hydraulic models and stuff like that. But the other thing is because we're so close to Framingham, we border Framingham, we have less than a mile away from where the aqueduct is. So we've been in contact with the MWA for establishing either an emergency connection with them or some, you know, as a backup source. So some redundancy here. So we're looking at that. I advise everybody to do that because you just never know. You want to keep all options open. Unfortunately, not everybody's going to have the opportunity to connect onto the MWA, but having emergency interconnections with the surrounding communities is a big deal.
So we have a couple more questions in the chat. Tom Trainer is asking, have any of your towns investigated the sources of the PFAS contamination in your public wells and developed plans to eliminate the PFAS sources?
That's a great question. So in fact, I wrote that down as a note. All of our sources, we've got 9 wells. The PFAS is pretty uniform in all the sources. So it's really hard to pinpoint it to just one, you know, one manufacturer or one factory or whatever that maybe contributed to the groundwater being contaminated throughout the entire town. Hudson, they were actually, they were before us and had a major problem in a couple of their wells, had to take them offline, provide boiled water, but they were able to identify a couple of sources over there and then actually went after them. So that was a good thing, but for most of us out there, I think we're all going to be in the same boat. But speaking of that, Nick, that's why that's a really good question. Ultimately, we know the real source of PFAS, and those are the manufacturers of PFAS compounds. And so, any of you that aren't aware of, there's a couple of major class action lawsuits, so they're called multi-district litigations. We actually teamed up with a conglomerate of law firms. SL Environmental up in New Hampshire is kind of heading up the one that we're involved with. And so we're going after 3M and DuPont and some of the other manufacturers of these compounds. And it's not going to be enough to pay for everything that we've had pony up for these projects, but it's going to be significant. And so we're pursuing that right now. So, and the thing is too, all the water suppliers are eligible to sign on to these things. So if you haven't done so yet, my advice is look into it, get involved with it, because ultimately you're going to be able to get some money back. So
Yeah,
that's a great question. I'm glad somebody brought that up.
yeah, we have a couple more questions. Rob Farley from Chatham, what conservation efforts have you undertaken with the community / politicians so that the quality of water pumped and treated is lower?
Was that the quantity of water, Nicole?
Let me just pull that one back up.
Sorry about that.
I might need more coffee. Yes, it's the quantity.
Quantity of water.
Quantity, not the quality, the quantity. Nobody wants lower quality water. We want higher quality.
So I'll take that one because when we first were identified to having PFAS in our water, it was 2019. And so we actually, out of our 7 wells, we had 6 of them with detection. So shutting off sources was not an option for us. Not that we weren't concerned about our citizens, but this water has had this material in it probably for decades. And there was no high mortality or toxicology to make a point that our residents were under health concerns, because we had been already operating under the EPA standard of 70 parts per trillion. So thankfully, our town administrator is actually on the state PFAS task force. So, great support above me to know the speaking points and to be able to calm the residents in the community that, yes, we're taking action. We're spending millions of dollars to remove these contaminants out of the supply, and we'll get them on as fast as we possibly can. But we want to spend the money right the first time and not have to do this multiple times and causing our water rates to go through the roof. Yeah.
That's a great.
The conservation efforts, Nicole, I think that, is, you have water restrictions and water bans, outside watering bans, things of that nature, which have gone on in many communities, but have more specifically been related to drought rather than contamination. So I'm not aware of any communities that, have restricted use due to the amount of or quantity of water that they have to treat. But it's a good question and a good thought.
Yeah, yeah. We have another question, and I think, Ben, you touched on this. Do any of you hold any hope that PFAS manufacturers will ultimately have to pay for your remediation efforts?
No question. It's already happening. There's already been a settlement with DuPont and 3M. 3M was the biggest one. I can't tell you exactly what the dollar amount was. It was a multi-million-dollar settlement, and DuPont was not much less than that. So that's already happening right now, and so there's money already put aside for water supplies throughout the entire country with the settlement claim. So just that's why I talked about it earlier. You need to, go online, find out what's out there, and then reach out to one of these major law firms that are involved with this. But also, there's a lot of fraud out there too. So just be aware that somebody claiming to be a law firm or something like that, they're going to help get you money. We didn't have to pay anything to get involved with this. We just signed up and away we went. So we got involved with this early on. And so the law firm that we're with is very, very reputable. But ultimately, there are other ones out there too. So my recommendation is to anybody, if you're not involved with anything like this, you need to pursue it, because ultimately you're only, you're doing what's best for your community, for the ratepayers and stuff like that. So they're investing a lot of money. So if they can get some kind of a break on their investment, that's up to us to find out and hopefully make it happen. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention we're in the same. We filed on for the class action lawsuit as well. So they just recently asked for maximum pump rates to value the amount of money we're going to get in response, and that's we used the Barron and Bud. We've used them in the past, but the MTBE contaminant was out there years ago, and they worked good for us on that lawsuit. So we're hoping that things could move along nicely with this as well. But I guess all the law firms are all working together to come to a resolution that's that they pass along to each other.
Right.
Do you have anything to add, Rich?
Well, I kind of smirk because I've read some of the legal documents, and Easton is also in the throes with the litigation as well. And I can't tell you how many hours I've spent pulling out data, just like Fran mentioned about flow rates and levels of PFAS, and I think I pulled out that information half a dozen times only to be asked for it again.
Yeah.
I agree.
So that it's now, reading the fine print, it says no one customer will ever get more than $10 million. So I just hope our community gets something, and it will be pale to what we will have spent, but at least it's something coming back at our ratepayers.
Yeah. Well, we have no more questions in the chat, and we've spent quite a bit of time here together, and I know that everyone has to. Ooh, wait a minute, I got one more.
You spoke too soon, Nicole.
I know. Oh, no, I think it's just a comment. The practical and complex insights shared here were very much appreciated. Thank you. And that was from Daryl Beardsley. Thank you, Daryl.
You did it.
So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. I want to thank Paul for hosting, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today for our first coffee talk where we're spilling the beans on municipal matters. And hopefully next time we'll have some more guests and some more interesting topics.
Awesome. Nice job, Nick. Thanks,
Thanks.
guys. I
Thank
had a
you.
great
Thank you
time.
all.
Thanks, everyone.
No.
Okay.